Now we can speak to one of the leading pro-European Conservative MPs, Ken Clarke. He is in Nottingham. Thank you for joining us this morning, Mr Clarke.
I'm glad to be here.
Nadine Dorries there, I hope you could hear her, said that she believes the rebels, you and others who voted against the government on Wednesday, are trying to reverse Brexit.
Oh, you succeeded in getting her into all this personal stuff, but I don't think she's aiming at me. I was a member of the Heath government, which took us into Europe. I was a member of the Thatcher government, which led Europe into creating the single market. I did not vote for a referendum, and I don't think my constituents were in much doubt about my views. The 2017 manifesto was produced after I'd been adopted as a candidate. No one sent me a copy, and I haven't actually ever seen a copy of it. So let's get back to the big issues, which are: how do we preserve the future prosperity of this country? How do we preserve a leading position in world affairs to look after our interest? What is the best thing to do for the interests of our children and our grandchildren? All this other stuff, all this right-wing newspaper rubbish is, as Anna Soubry says, an attempt to get someone to form a Tory equivalent to Momentum.
But do you believe that the way to preserve the things you talk about is to reverse Brexit?
I don't think Parliament's going to do that, because I was in a small minority when I voted against invoking Article 50, and I'm now accepting that this Parliament is moving towards Brexit. The country is going to leave Brexit. What I want to avoid is our suddenly turning Brexit into a proposal that we start having tariffs between ourselves and the rest of Europe, we start having customs barriers where we have big lorry parks and we train thousands of customs officers. We have different market regulations, different rules about vacuum cleaner noise. That was not what the referendum was about, and more importantly, it will do great damage to our economy. It could cost thousands of jobs and make this country much less attractive for the future investment we need. So that's why the Cabinet, who are deeply divided on the details, have now got to try to reach an agreement that produces a sensible political and economic future for this country in the real world, not in the slightly childish world of knockabout politics.
So how
These
confident are you that the Cabinet will come to that compromise when they start to discuss the end state this week?
Well, we keep having these public statements which are rather alarming, but I'm reasonably confident that they can.
What are you alarmed by in these public statements?
You're trying to get me going on about Boris's habit of occasionally making speeches which are plainly out of line with what the Prime Minister has just done, which he did at the time of the Florence speech, and he's done as last week. But the Chancellor has a duty to actually look after the British economy, to make sure business is not deterred from coming to this country, to make sure we keep our markets in Europe and in the rest of the world as intact as we can. And I think the Cabinet will rally around that.
But Theresa May made pretty clear in her Florence speech that we will leave the single market, we will leave the customs union, there will be no role for the European Court of Justice. Has she not already ruled out the post-Brexit future that you're hoping for?
Well, she first declared that in the Lancaster House speech, which was the first time anybody had interpreted first time anybody in authority had interpreted the referendum result to mean that, and it does give rise to a lot of problems. What they've now got to address is the problems that arise. As I said, it started with last week. We suddenly faced Ireland, which nobody had mentioned, which is an insult to the people of Northern Ireland and the Republic, really. And we agreed then must keep the border open with regulatory convergence on both sides. It applies to Dover, it applies to Folkestone. We won't get the planning permission for the lorry parks we would need if we rush on and just abandon the single market in March 2019. You've got Gibraltar coming. Let's not go into Gibraltar. That will make the Irish problems look like a picnic. And you'll also have a lot of British businesses, multinational businesses, wondering where on earth Britain is going unless we now interpret the policy. I prefer the policy of the Florence speech. Move on from the Florence speech, which was a big move forward, move on from the fact that we finally settled these three quite simple issues that had to be settled about our withdrawal. That could have been done months ago had it not been for the troubles inside the cabinet.
With the vote
and
last week,
now we need to get on to a sensible economic future worked out by people who are prepared to read the brief and know something about trade, investment and business in the modern globalised economy.
with the vote last week, in which Parliament now gets a meaningful say on the Brexit deal, does that mean, do you interpret that to mean, that Parliament could send the Prime Minister back to Brussels to renegotiate a different deal if Parliament doesn't like it, and therefore your views will have to be taken into account when it comes to the final deal?
The politics in this country is based on all governments having to take the views of Parliament into account. It's very difficult when the Parliament has a small majority, and when there's such confusion because the issue cuts across party lines, it makes it more difficult. But it was a mistake to invoke the royal prerogative and say it's nothing to do with Parliament. It's a mistake to try to avoid parliamentary votes. In the end, as this is determining our future for the next generation or two on very important issues, Parliament will have to approve before government can conclude a deal. That should strengthen Theresa's and David Davis's hand in the negotiations, because just like the other 27 negotiators, they will have to say they can't deliver things which they can't get past their own Parliament.
It's being reported this morning that Heidi Allen, one of the Conservative MPs who rebelled against the government in that vote last week, is facing threats of deselection. How do you are you perfectly safe in your constituency, and what do you think about any of the other rebels being deselected?
I don't think any of my constituents have any doubts about my views. Not all my association agree with me, but I've never fallen out personally with anybody about political differences, and I'm certainly not on very friendly terms with my association. I do think this is all nonsense, and I think it's caused by all the rubbish that keeps appearing in the right-wing newspapers, which are completely lost their heads over the whole thing. It is totally absurd to say this is helping Jeremy Corbyn, it's weakening Theresa May and all the rest of it. Here we are, 3 days after the vote took place. Theresa May is no weaker than she was after that. Jeremy Corbyn is not marching towards Downing Street. What has been voted for is a parliamentary accountability of the government. Nothing to do with blocking Brexit, and it is utterly idiotic if a few of our association members in various parts of the country start interpreting this as the start of some sort of purge of backbench members of conscience. Eurosceptics have been voting against the government for the last 30 years, and no one on my side of the argument has ever gone around saying that they should be expelled from the party and sent to outer darkness. The Conservative Party is a broad church. It's a free market party, combined with a strong social conscience, and it's been a pro-European party for the first 50 years of my membership.